is whether it is being correctly interpreted and whether it ought to be regarded as the fons et origo of the whole need for religion. I have nothing to suggest which could have a decisive influence on the solution of this problem. The idea of men's receiving an intimation of their connection with the world around them through an immediate feeling which is from the outset directed to that purpose sounds so strange and fits in so badly with the fabric of our psychology that one is justified in attempting to discover a psychoanalytic, that is, a genetic explanation of such a feeling. The following line of thought suggests itself. Normally there is nothing of which we are more certain than the feeling of ourself, of our own ego. This ego appears to us as something autonomous and unitary, marked off distinctly from everything else. That such an appearance is deceptive, and that on the contrary the ego is continued inwards, without any sharp delimitation into an unconscious mental entity which we designate as the id, and for which it serves as a kind of facade. This was a discovery first made by psychoanalytic research, which should still have much more to tell us about the relation of the ego to the id. But towards the outside, at any rate, the ego seems to maintain clear and sharp lines of demarcation. There is only one state, admittedly an unusual state, but not one that can be stigmatized as pathological, in which it does not do this. At the height of being in love, the boundary between ego and object threatens to melt away. Against all the evidence of his senses, a man who is in love declares that I and you are one, and is prepared to behave as if it were a fact. What can be temporarily done away with by a physiological, i.e. normal function, must also, of course, be liable to be disturbed by pathological processes. Pathology has made us acquainted with a great number of states in which the boundary lines between the ego and the external world become uncertain, or in which they are actually drawn incorrectly. There are cases in which parts of a person's own body, even portions of his own mental life, his perceptions, thoughts, and feelings, appear alien to him and as not belonging to his ego. There are other cases in which he ascribes to the external world things that clearly originate in his own ego and that ought to be acknowledged by it. Thus even the feeling of our own ego is subject to disturbances, and the boundaries of the ego are not constant. Further reflection tells us that the adult's ego feeling cannot have been the same from the beginning. It must have gone through a process of development, which cannot, of course, be demonstrated, but which admits of being constructed with a fair degree of probability. An infant at the breast does not as yet distinguish his ego from the external world as the source of the sensations flowing in upon him. He gradually learns to do so, in response to various promptings. He must be very strongly impressed by the fact that some sources of excitation, which he will later recognize as his own bodily organs, can provide him with sensations at any moment, whereas other sources evade him from time to time. Among them what he desires most of all, his mother's breast, and only reappear as a result of his screaming for help. In this way there is, for the first time, set over against the ego an object, in the form of something which exists outside and which is only forced to appear by a special action. A further incentive to a disengagement of the ego from the general mass of sensations, that is, to the recognition of an outside, an external world, is provided by the frequent, manifold, and unavoidable sensations of pain and unpleasure, the removal and avoidance of which is enjoined by the pleasure principle in the exercise of its unrestricted domination. A tendency arises to separate from the ego everything that can become a source of such unpleasure, to throw it outside, and to create a pure pleasure ego, which is confronted by a strange and threatening outside. The boundaries of this primitive pleasure ego cannot escape rectification through experience. Some of the things that one is unwilling to give up because they give pleasure are nevertheless not ego, but object. And some sufferings that one seeks to expel turn out to be inseparable from the ego in virtue of their internal origin. One comes to learn a procedure by which, through a deliberate direction of one's sensory activities and through suitable muscular action, one can differentiate between what is internal, what belongs to the ego, and what is external, what emanates from the outer.